It's at this time of year, ladies and gentlemen, that I think about harvest season. Maybe you, like me, have seen those lights going across the countryside of tractors and combines and semis, harvesting the fields and the crops in a race against the change of seasons. And I don't just think about it because I love to drive on rural roads. It's actually because I grew up on a dairy farm not far from here. In fact, we didn't own the farm. The owner was a German Catholic bachelor farmer named Albert. And Albert was a saint. He was a saint to our family. He was a member of our family. He was much more than an employer. He instilled in all of us a wonderful work ethic. And he was a man of gratitude and grit. And what I mean by that is he was the type of person, like a lot of farmers, who know what has to be done without necessarily knowing how it's going to get done. And as a bachelor farmer, he had that kind of grit to figure those things out. And it was amazing what a grateful and spirit of gratitude the man had, because by any stretch of the imagination, his life was very, very challenging. I mean, he was alone out there in the prairie as a bachelor with no children, but lucky for him, children was something the Cruz family specialized in. There was 8 of us, and we all learned to milk and bale hay. But harvest season wasn't always sunshine and rainbows, by the way. There was a lot of stress at that time because that is when things break down on the farm. The worst possible time. And there's 2 types of breakdowns in rural America. And the first is a structural problem, a structural breakdown. You need to retool, rethink, and replace whatever it is that broke down. And then there are duct tape and baling twine breakdowns. This is how you get through the harvest season. You just duct tape it and baling twine it, and it's what you do just to get through. And I want to talk to you tonight about a structural breakdown, a structural problem that we're going through in rural America that perhaps we've misidentified as a duct tape problem. And you probably know what I'm talking about because you probably feel like that duct tape stretched too thin across the gap. Of course, I'm talking about the hollowing out of the American workforce. And we know that in rural America, we are demographically older, poorer, and sicker than our metropolitan neighbors, so we know that it's going to hit us first, harder, and deeper. But in order, as a lawyer, I feel like I have to prove that this is in fact a structural problem. So I'm going to show you some government data. For those of you who didn't read my bio, yes, I spent 10 years working for government, or as you all say, behind enemy lines. And I know what you're thinking, because if you use the G word and you left the farm to become a government lawyer, your family talks about you the way they might talk about a son or daughter who chose a life of crime or left the church that they pray for. But for those of you who are still with me and ready for a good old government bar chart, I want you to take a look at this. This is all of the 65-year-olds in Minnesota over the decade. So the way to read this is from 1950 to 1960, 85,000 people turned 65. What do we know about 65-year-olds? Well, they start dropping out of the labor force. They start becoming high utilizers of health care and plane tickets and free samples at the grocery store, but that's not what this talk is about. And here's where we are now. Let's see if I can do this. There we go. That's the boomers. The silver tsunami, as we said in government. And as you can see, we do not have enough people to replace one for one. This is a structural problem in our workforce. This was always going to happen. Yes, COVID preceded it. It made it worse. It made it happen faster. But this was always going to happen. This data is actually 2 slides I showed to the CentraCare board in 2019. It's old data. And if you look at it from the state demographer, it predicts exactly what's happening now to the workforce is going to happen. And so we do have a structural problem. But before I get into the way we should be approaching structural problems, I want to say just a word of good news in terms of some recent data. So the Pew Research Center and the Gallup polling agency have both done independent studies since COVID. And there has been an absolute surge in demand to live the rural way of life. Yes, you heard me correctly. There's an absolute surge in demand to live the rural way of life. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's take the lowest number, because they both came back with different numbers. But the lowest number was from Pew Research. It said 35% of Americans would prefer to live in rural America. Why is that significant? Well, because only 20% of Americans actually do live in rural America. That means that there are 15% of Americans who would love to go to a meat raffle but just can't find one. We have latent meat raffle demand, people, and for the uninitiated, if you want an explanation of what a meat raffle is, it's where meat is raffled. Like a lot of rural terms, you just flip it around and that's the explanation. Corn detasselers detassel corn, rock pickers pick rocks, turkey chasers chase turkeys, and cow tippers do not tip over cows. That's not a real thing. So my point is that there is good news demographically that people do want to move to a rural area, but how are we going to unlock that demand for this structural problem that we have? Well, like so many things, if you take on a structural problem, others come out of the woodwork. If we want folks to come to rural Minnesota and rural America to help replenish what we have and preserve our way of life, we're going to need housing. We're going to need education. So many things and so many other structural problems that you can start to feel overwhelmed and outmatched. But I want to tell you about just one example of a different structural problem, the digital divide between metropolitan and rural for broadband. In the early days of the pandemic, I was sitting in my office at the St. Cloud Hospital, stressed out, trying to keep up with regulations, lockdown orders, things from CMS, you name it. And my phone rang. And it was Matt and Tina on behalf of Beth Ford from the Land O'Lakes Corporation. And they said, Santo, we're so grateful for what CentraCare is doing for our rural members at this time. What can we do for you? Well, I was too stressed out to be very creative, but they didn't come with just good intentions. They came with a very good idea. They said, Santo, we want CentraCare to turn on a portion of its private Wi-Fi over to the public, because these were the days where the only options were remote work, distance learning, and telehealth. And it was difficult to do as a healthcare agency, but we did it. But they didn't stop there. They said, now we want another company to do it, and another vendor to do it, and another partner to do it. And before you knew it, they had achieved over 100 companies in 49 states, providing 10,000 connections a day all across America to rural families who needed broadband access. But we didn't stop there, because this is a structural problem, and this is a very thick layer of duct tape. We went to Washington. We worked with Democrats and Republicans and got them both to buy in. Land O'Lakes led with the Trump administration and the Biden administration, because structural change in addressing our challenges requires us to put ideology aside. And this work is so important. Now, I have to say that their approach was, again, gratitude and grit. Like Albert, they knew what had to be done before they knew how it was going to get done. And the new law that's just been passed and signed into law has $65 billion for rural broadband investments, the largest investment in rural America in a generation. Every state in the union will have a minimum of $100 million to bridge the gap between rural and metro for rural broadband access. That's leadership. That's structural change. That's rethinking. That's retooling. Now, I want to go back to how are we going to address so many of the issues we're facing right now. And what does it really mean to say gratitude and grit? It's a nice, catchy phrase. It perhaps is a little Pollyanna. But it's actually the right medicine for what ails us. Because yes, we have structural problems. Yes, we have a digital divide. Yes, we have a rural metro divide. We have so many divisions. We have so many that, to be honest with you, the real sickness in rural America and greater America is that we've lost faith in ourselves, in our friends, in our families, in our communities, in our country, and for some of us, in God. Our faith has been rattled by what has taken place these past 3 years, and gratitude is the way to restore it. Gratitude is what tells you there is someone looking out for you. There is someone willing to help you. You are not alone. You have people you can rely upon. And grit is that ability to say, I know what has to be done. I just don't know how we're going to do it yet. And that's really the first step. And tonight I'd like you to take the first step with me. Please pull out your phones. I know you all have them. Some of them you've been itching. Don't answer the text you've received. This isn't a survey. I want you to take out your phone, and I want you to text the words thank you to someone who has been there for you these past 3 years. Someone who's reached out to you, like Matt and Tina from Land O'Lakes reached out to me. Maybe they brought you a meal while your family was sick. Maybe they checked on you. Maybe they were just a listening ear. But I want you to text that person right now, thank you, and nothing else. And more often than not, the response you're going to get to that text is, for what? That's what these people are like, aren't they? They don't even know what they do for us. But I don't want you to tell them what they did. I want you to tell them what it meant to you. I want you to explain what it meant to you when they stepped into your life and chose to step in with some grit. And that actually is going to be the gratitude that you well up to restore your faith that we can do this. The only way out is through. The only way through is together. And the only way to be together is to reach out. And so the grit part of this talk and challenge is tomorrow morning. I want you now to text yourself a different name. I want this to be the person you've been thinking about but haven't reached out to. The person that you've been wondering if they're okay. The person you've lost touch with. Maybe that person's a family member. Maybe it's a colleague or a former colleague. Maybe it's a distant cousin that you unfriended in the middle of the pandemic. These are the people that are going to help us get through this, and you are going to be the person that reestablishes the connection, and you can take on the structural change that's needed. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We have difficult days ahead. There's no doubt about it. But with gratitude and grit, there's no reason why those harder days cannot also be better days. Thank you very much.